When observing the modern liberal movement, many conservatives are left wondering, why do liberals do some of the things that they do? How did everything become so offensive? Why are liberals so hostile to opposing beliefs? When did the left develop a sense of duty to police all thoughts and opinions other than their own? Why is it that liberals lie so much? How can liberals not see the failure of their own policies? How can liberals behave in some of the most disgusting, despicable, and vile ways and believe that they are doing something honorable? How can liberals be so openly hypocritical, doing all of the things they say they are fighting against?
So the question becomes why? How do they think they're making a better world? Well, the first thing that comes into your mind when trying to understand, as I've so desperately tried to understand, is that if they side always with evil, then they must be evil. But we have a problem with this, don't we? We all know too many people who fit this category who aren't evil. Many of my lifelong friends, the people I grew up with, relatives, close relatives. And they're not evil. So if they're not evil, then the next place your mind goes is, well, they must just be incredibly stupid. Right? They don't mean to always side with evil, failed, and wrong. They just don't know what they're doing. But we have a problem with this as well. You can't say Ward Churchill is a stupid man. You can't say all these academics are stupid people. And frankly, if it was just stupidity, they'd be right more often. Now, what's the expression? Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn now and again. So if they're not stupid and they're not evil, what's their plan? How do they think they're making a better world? How do they think they're making a better world?
We will answer these questions, but in order to do so, we must understand what exactly liberalism is, where it came from, and its beliefs and motivations. When many people think of liberalism, they think of civil rights, social justice, equality, environmentalism, feminist movements, and so on. Most people, including liberals themselves, don't really understand what liberalism is or what it believes. Sometimes this is on purpose, because when looking behind the curtain, they usually don't like what they find. But liberalism in the left is built upon some foundational principles just as conservatism is, yet liberals are far more reluctant to actually know what they are, because when you look hard at the principles of liberalism, it's clear that they are simply false. It is not real. Once this is understood, the beliefs, the emotions, and the values seen in liberalism finally make sense. Like a futuristic movie with stunning special effects that seem impossible, it makes much more sense when you remember it's just a movie. It's fiction. In this series, I'm going to show you why the whole doctrine of liberalism is built on unfounded and often clearly incorrect theories about societies and governments, and also why the belief in them and liberalism's massive popularity is actually very dangerous.
The Democrats are wrong on just about every issue. Well, I'm here to propose to you it's not just about every issue, it's quite literally every issue. And it's not just wrong, it's as wrong can be. It's 180 degrees from right. It is diametrically opposed to that which is good, right, and successful. All right, what I discovered is that this is not an accident. This is part of a philosophy that now dominates the whole of Western Europe. And the Democratic Party of today, I, like some others, call it modern liberalism. And the modern liberal will invariably side with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success.
Liberalism's origin comes from the works of many political theorists and social reformers from the 16th to 20th centuries. Thomas More's work in the 16th century, 17th century philosophers like Francis Bacon and Descartes, from the works of utopian pre-socialists like Robert Owen of the 18th and 19th centuries, or French political theorists Henry de Saint-Simon, political theorists John Stuart Mill and William Morris in the 19th century, and more recently the works of people like John Dewey, Karl Marx, John Maynard Keynes, Professor Charles Frankel, and Professor J. Solwyn Shapiro. One of the key identifying features of the liberal belief, which is that man is intrinsically good and nothing about human nature stands in the way of achieving a perfectly good, peaceful society. This is contrary to previous belief systems, along with modern conservative belief that believes original sin is unavoidable, that man is flawed, capable of great good and great evil, and that fact is inescapable. Liberalism does not share this belief. Liberalism believes that man is a perfectly rational being and can focus on science for enlightenment. Faith in man, faith in science. Faith in man's ability to reason and solve problems, and that religions and traditional customs are what has led to the disruption of peace, and a world that could get rid of this belief in religion or original sin will be a step towards the good society, according to liberals. Man, according to liberalism, is born ignorant, not wicked. They believe the reason for the poor social conditions and much of the evils in the world are because of old customs and traditions. Since these old traditions and religions have caused these errors in our history and have caused ignorance, all traditions and customs should be considered highly suspicious. While a peaceful, virtuous, and prosperous society is a nice goal, it can only be achieved by accepting the liberal doctrine. While the vision of what the world free from all ailments, disease, and poverty actually looks like is somewhat obscure, but nonetheless liberals believe through reason, freed from superstition, authority, customs, or traditions, mankind can achieve the betterment of society. But by being attached to this optimistic view of human nature, that man can actually achieve this utopian bliss, the liberal has no answer for the unexplained hardships and the genuine tragedies of life. Liberals cannot and will not face this, so when there is no ready explanation,
the 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe. That
1 in 5 women will be raped or attempted raped while they're in college.
Right. Oh, it's an epidemic.
If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
This belief in the intrinsic good of mankind that would blossom into fruition if only ignorance were removed is not a statement that comes from fact, but from their prior commitment to the liberal doctrine. They believe that liberalism stands for independence of mind on all occasions, for thought free from obligation to any authority, an optimistic attitude towards the future, and a skeptical one of the past. This line of thinking convinces itself that since the liberal mind has no rooted beliefs, it leaves him free to use reason that is not prior attached to any dogma and can always see and judge objectively and free from any bias. Because according to liberalism, it is not human nature to have biases because humans are perfectly rational beings. So, the liberal, according to its own belief system which opposes traditions and customs from the past, is committed to constant change, not just accepting it, but actively fostering this constant change. Their own belief is dedicated to doing something about any and every social problem, and this provides the fuel for always having something on their schedule to be outraged about and ultimately to be fighting to change. They believe ignorance has been caused by faulty institutions of the past, along with traditions and customs, and the cure for this is universal education. What liberal education is supposed to do is provide the antidote for the causes of ignorance, which are old customs and all non-rational belief. Since man is not inherently flawed, as the conservative might believe, with the right education and the removal of this ignorance, the perfect society will be achieved. In removing old customs and belief systems, all differences can be removed as well. Race, gender, nationality are all irrelevant. We are all just man and can be cured with the right education to remove the ignorance that has taught us these differences. The liberal assumes that with the proper education and use of reason, men will select the choice for peace and that no one would ever choose trouble, pain, or greed because that would be irrational, and with the right education, you can teach against all non-rational behavior, so that once education gets rid of ignorance, prejudice, superstition, and frustrating customs, human beings will conduct themselves reasonably and will be thus able to build a peaceful society with freedom, justice, and material well-being. But there are problems with this. Most notably, all facts in history available to us do not support this hypothesis of man being intrinsically good. While the liberal will dismiss the religious belief as unfounded superstition and that the idea of original sin is simply an old folktale, the concept of man as a flawed being has been seen and carried out in great detail throughout the entire history of man. On every continent, every race, every religion, every society on earth, from primitive tribes with spears and arrowheads to empires capable of building great colosseums or great pyramid structures, the belief system that man is capable of great good as well as great evil has been proven true to form in the history of mankind. To assert that crime, corruption, cruelty, and deaths at the hands of other men are exceptions to normal human rule, one has to be completely blind to all of the world's history. So the liberal doctrine that paints this picture of the utopian bliss, while it may warm the heart and give hope of the perfectly peaceful society, directly contradicts what man, across all societies and belief systems, has proven to be true at every turn. Liberals believe they are the party of reason, as they are free from any traditional customs, most notably religion, and by focusing on reason and the scientific method, liberalism makes claim to be the guardian and shepherd of all science. However, one of the fundamental principles of science is that what happens in the future will probably resemble what has been observed in the past. A belief that requires one to assume that the future will be dramatically different from the past is false on the evidence in every regard, since the only evidence available to man in regard to societies and government rule is the history of other societies and governments before us, and to suggest a future government or society that will be so radically different and impervious to the falls of societies and governments of the past is unscientific, unreasonable, and irrational, and should not be taken seriously as a legitimate hypothesis, even if the party making the irrational claim tells you they are the gatekeeper of science. It's ironic that liberalism has convinced themselves of such strict adherence to reason and science, because all recorded history provides an undeniable refutation to the liberal interpretation of man as intrinsically good. All evidence available to us from history explains a very different story, one that supports the conservative claim that men can often be irrational, aggressive, disruptive, abusive, and not committed, even once ignorance is removed, to reason and rationale. But the liberal creates an alibi to history's massive refutation to the liberal interpretation as man being good. They simply say that all those societies of the past were not educated and handicapped by the ignorant customs and institutions of the past. But there is no response to that sort of claim, because it isn't based on any facts or evidence, because here the liberal is speaking as an ideologue, and no amount of evidence or facts can prove them wrong. But the fact that this happens again demonstrates the falseness. Again, we see the irony that the group committed to reason and science can refute facts and evidence with theoretical concepts and abstractions. John Adams wrote, "Human passions are insatiable. Self-interest, private avidity, ambition, and avarice will exist in every state of society and under every form of government. Reason, justice, and equity never had weight enough on the face of the earth to govern the councils of men." According to the liberal creed, the only thing standing between man and the utopian bliss is ignorance, and to cure this ignorance we replace old customs of the past with schooling and education. By its own principles, liberalism cannot accept as a solution to the world's ills old traditions and customs learned from home, family, or religion. Since these more traditional institutions were prevalent in the past, and the world's problems still exist, there is a correlated hostility towards tradition. This often extreme distaste for ways of the past is often one of the most identifying and obvious features of liberalism. This hostility towards the past propels the motivation for constant change, because there needs to be change to remove these old beliefs and install new ones, most notably through universal education. But not only is this hypothesis unsupported by history, it conveniently dismisses the potential for education to indoctrinate and corrupt minds with evil. An educated man is just as susceptible, if not more so, to propaganda, just as much as it is to truth, which is why some of the most educated peoples and nations have still created the greatest evils. Germany was one of the most literate and educated nations of the 20th century, but Hitler still rose to power. Vladimir Lenin, Alger Hiss, Hassan al-Banna, Osama bin Laden were all very educated men. We see ISIS and many of these terrorist organizations are compiled by many, some estimates more than half, of highly educated men. But even so, the liberal belief system isn't fazed by these facts and often refuses to look directly at them. After indoctrinating young minds with this belief system, liberalism is actively recruiting young soldiers in its crusade against Western civilization and elimination of traditional customs, because it has taught the young and the malleable that these customs are the causes of problems. They thus have more bodies for protest and more support in the reform of all levels of government and policy, in order to equalize and offset these great ills.
What is the liberal premise?
I guess the Rousseau notion, that man is born free but is everywhere in chains, that the real problem of the world is that the institutions are wrong. If the institutions were right, then there is nothing in human nature that would cause us to be unhappy. It's the fact that we have the wrong institution.
What is the conservative premise?
That man is flawed from day one, and that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And whatever you do to deal with one of man's flaws, it creates another problem, but that you try to get the best trade-off you can get, and that's all you can hope for.